Playing together today has never been simpler. We're now reaching a point where games that were never intended to be played online can. As much as I love a good single-player campaign, there's just something special about sharing your favorite game with someone else. Unless they're better than you at it. Now, if I were to have you take a guess as to what the first big networked multiplayer first-person shooter was, you'd probably guess Doom, right? After all, it pioneered the way for playing online and changed the distribution of video games as a whole. Well, you'd be wrong on this obviously set up, incredibly obscure trivia question. There was actually a game before Doom that established the idea of connecting systems together to play a video game. MIDI Maze, or Faceball 2000, is probably a game you haven't thought much about, if you even heard of it in the first place. What's crazier is exactly how Faceball managed to connect at all. So what the hell is MIDI Maze anyway? Well, it's a first-person shooter where players take control of smiley faces or poor Pac-Man knockoffs and attempt to shoot one another. The walls have no textures, you're working with tank controls to the extreme. There's no strafing, no special weapons to speak of, it's as basic can be. Still, you can create new maps through a text editor, which is pretty cool. The game does have bots, so you can play alone, something that even certain modern shooters will neglect entirely. And you're able to divide games up so you can play on teams or have a free-for-all. All this for up to 16 players and their computers each, which I should mention was in 1987. 6 years before Doom. Now that was specifically the Atari ST version. The version you might be more familiar with arrived in 1991 for the Game Boy under the name Faceball 2000. Reworked from the ground up, Faceball 2000 includes a single-player specific mode with actual levels to progress through, plus power-ups such as stronger bullets and extra lives. Again, you still have the tank controls and the frame rate is, well, it's basically a slideshow, but nonetheless, for 1991 and for Game Boy, it's fairly impressive. The arena mode returns with up to 8 other bots for you to choose and blast away. Unbelievably, the link cable feature, like its ST brethren, allows 16 copies of the game to be linked together and played at once. Doing so requires multiples of Nintendo's 4-player adapter, and honestly, this feature seems a little suspect. I did a lot of research on this one particular detail, and while it said it can be done, I couldn't really find anyone who successfully had yet. A year later, the Super Nintendo version dropped, with completely different levels and music from the Game Boy, plus split screen. Yeah, the split screen chugs quite a bit and doesn't work nearly as well as the single-player campaign, but this is by far the prettiest version of the game. There were also additions for the Game Boy and PC engine, which were released exclusively in Japan, and supposedly one for the Virtual Boy, which was nearly complete before being scrapped. So it's clear the novelty of Faceball 2000 really came from how many people could play it at once, and let's face it, that novelty has never really gone away, the numbers just increased. But networking in 1987 was very different from 2019. So how exactly were you able to connect 16 different computers together? Pals, allow me to introduce you to the concept of the MIDI ring. See, each Atari ST computer was outfitted with 2 ports for MIDI in and MIDI out. These ports were typically used for making music, like say plugging a synthesizer in and then using the MIDI out to record to proper equipment. This is why Faceball 2000's original name was MIDI Maze. Instead of using those ports for their intended purpose, players could daisy-chain their systems together, one after another, to network their computers and play MIDI Maze together. If that sounds like one big pain in the butt, well, that's because it was. MIDI Maze never gained a huge notoriety because of the cumbersome setup, but there was enough of a cult following behind it for the Game Boy, Super Nintendo, and all other versions to be produced. Still, it was this idea that planted the seeds for what id would accomplish with Doom in 1993. It wasn't really until Doom that deathmatches took off, and now today, they're practically an expectation of any game that features guns. With games like Fortnite allowing 100 players at once, having a mere 16 might seem quaint. And while Doom may have perfected the deathmatch, we all have MIDI Maze to thank for getting us where we are today.